All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me on the webinar this evening. My name is Garrett McLaughlin. Tonight, we will cover cadence, how to manipulate your step rate to reduce pain and improve performance. Again, super excited. This is something that I talk about on a regular basis. So really looking forward to sharing this information with you this evening. So hopefully you can apply this strategy into your running moving forward. Before we get started, do me a favor, silence any technology around you, cell phones, TVs, a lot of little details within the webinar today. So I want to make sure you and fully understand how cadence can impact your running to hopefully put this into action tomorrow moving forward. Somewhere on your screen, you will notice there is a Q&A button, depending on how you're accessing the webinar on the computer, iPad, cell phone. Make sure you locate that for a second. If you have any questions, comments, feedback as we get through the material today, welcome to write something in there. That comes directly to me. I'm happy to answer any questions as we go. If it's something that's not directly relatable to where we are in the webinar, I will make sure to answer it in the Q&A section at the very end. At the very end of the webinar, I will be entering names into a raffle to win one free month in the Healthy Running Program. This will include, regardless of location, doesn't matter where you live, running analysis, movement assessments, and me understanding your goals, needs, injury history, and then helping you design a specific plan to positively impact your running moving forward. If for some reason you cannot stay for the entire webinar, completely understand. It's a tough time here at night, 6 p.m. on a Thursday evening, but I will be sending out the webinar replay, winner of the raffle. That will happen tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So make sure you're checking your email tomorrow at 11. If you don't see it by 11:10, check that spam folder or reach out to me directly to make sure you get this material. Now, like I mentioned, my name is Garrett McLaughlin. I'm a licensed athletic trainer and strength conditioning coach, currently in West Bloomfield, Michigan, so Southeast Michigan, for those of you that are not Michigan natives. I run what's called the Healthy Running Program. The program is designed to help you get faster, move better, and reduce your likelihood of injury. And really, we try to tie in this longevity piece. We don't want to just PR in our next goal race and become injured, right? It's not worth it. We want to hopefully improve performance, improve the function of the body and those underlying pieces so you can see success for years and years to come. Now, what is cadence? Cadence is very simple, right? It's pretty much just the number of steps you take per minute while running, while walking, any type of or any form of locomotion. You'll hear it referred as step rate or step frequency as we start to look at a couple of different research studies and things throughout the webinar today. So just understand step rate and step frequency is synonymous with cadence, and it's the number of steps you take per minute. This is something that's very specific to each person. We know that height, limb length, injury history, biomechanics, kind of anatomy of your joints, a lot of things that go into cadence. But there's a lot of really good research behind it that shows manipulating your cadence the right way can have such a strong impact on your running. Now, cadence for me was something that I overlooked quite a bit early on. I would say, if you look through the slide here, it was a missing link. So I started out in the sports medicine field working with collegiate tennis, soccer, cross-country track and field, professional ultimate frisbee, and worked a lot of different sports with a lot of different athletes. We did a really good job of anytime we had an injury, evaluating that injury, putting them through the rehab treatment process to get them better, but didn't really do a great job of understanding running mechanics and how cadence can play a role in that. So about 6-7 years ago, I started to see there was just something was missing, right? I was working with a lot of these runners. We would do the evaluations. We would look at them move. We would create these really good programs to help them get faster, increase strength, stability, overcome injuries, and just overall become a better functioning runner. But some of them were still getting injured. And as I started to dig into the research a little bit more, I started to see what people refer to as the low-hanging fruit in the running world, and that was cadence. What we know through some of the research, which we'll talk about in a second, is cadence can have a very big impact on your running form and mechanics, running economy, but also the amount of load into the body from an injury standpoint. So if we can offset some of the load, improve running form in the process, we can see really good results with running moving forward. So I started to intertwine more running analysis alongside my evaluations and programs to now not just create a strength training or rehabilitation program for runners, but talk about running form and that piece of it a little bit more. And then once we combine both of those together, again, the results just took off from there. So cadence to me, it was that missing link years ago, which can have a really big impact on your running. Now, goal tonight through this webinar is to help you identify. It's really hard in a general webinar to tell you specifically, here, your cadence needs to be 170 steps per minute. There's no one individualized number that everyone or general number that everyone should achieve. It's specific to each person, but I want you to better understand cadence, how it fits more specific to your situation so you can improve your running form, reduce the likelihood of injury, and hopefully talking about that longevity piece, since about 75% of runners get hurt each and every year. And I want you to continue to run with limited issues for years and years to come. And I think cadence will help you do that. So before we get started here, I want to put up, and you'll notice I like to incorporate different simple little polls and things throughout the night just to see kind of how well you've been paying attention, get some feedback from the audience here. So I'm going to launch a poll here. I'm just curious, those of you that are on the webinar right now, what range does your cadence fall in? I have a whole different bunch of ranges here, from 140 steps per minute to 200 steps per minute. Or do you fall somewhere within there? Is the cadence something you've looked at before? If it isn't, just at the bottom there, you'll see I'm not sure. And then what are you trying to get from the webinar today? So is it reduce some kind of pain or injury, improve running economy and performance, address running form, or reduce the likelihood of injury? So take a second and just complete those two questions. Just want to get a better idea of who we're dealing with in the webinar today. So as we get through the content, hopefully I can individualize that to your needs a little bit more. All right, so we're going to wait till about 80% of people complete this, just to get a good idea from the crowd here. All right, so we see a range, as we always see with cadence. We're seeing a range of numbers here, 140 all the way up to 180, 190. A handful of people not sure. Interested in cadence to address running form. Seems like that's the biggest thing right now. Some to reduce the pain they're experiencing. A couple, again, from the injury reduction piece. So we'll talk about those things as we get more into the content here. Now, what's very important to do, I think, first is understand some of the research behind cadence. Let's not just, I don't want to throw my opinions out at you. That doesn't help anyone. One thing I've learned over the years is we need to make sure that we're looking at the science behind things. So many people are studying these things behind the scenes, publishing articles on them to tell us what they're finding. So we need to use that in our clinical practice on a day-to-day basis just to make the best decisions moving forward. Now, research behind cadence, we're going to focus on three things specifically. Running mechanics, right? This is a big area most people are interested in tonight. Running economy, and then pain specifically, whether that's recovering from an injury or reducing the likelihood of injury moving forward. But you'll notice that from an injury reduction standpoint, all of these pieces really fit together to help achieve that. Now, from a running mechanics standpoint, we're going to look at three different things. I want to show you some real life scenarios of runners that display that characteristic. So we're going to look at stride length and specifically overstriding. Is that foot landing too far out in front of the body center of mass? Vertical oscillation. Are you going too high? Again, running is a horizontal sport. We want to move from point A to point B in a nice efficient manner. The more we're bouncing up and down, the less efficient we are, the more energy we're wasting. And then step width or crossover sign. So if we think of running, right, if these are the feet here running on either side of a line, you'll see some people actually displaying this crossover sign, which usually shows a lack of stability somewhere. So we'll also cover that as well. Now, from an overstriding standpoint, again, very simple. This is something you can really pinpoint in a second, just to see, is that foot landing too far in front? And we like to use the knee as our guideline here. So we look at this young woman. So where her foot strikes the ground, again, not worrying about heel strike, midfoot strike, forefoot strike, none of that, but where her foot is landing in relation to her knee. So we can see as you draw a line down there, that foot is just out in front. So we can see she's overstriding. What this does is creates a braking mechanism. If that foot's landing too far in front, it's stopping the body's horizontal momentum. So as she moves forward, it's almost like her foot is stepping on the brake, right? It's slowing her down from moving forward in a nice, efficient, and cyclical way. So what we'd want to do from a cadence standpoint, if we can increase her cadence, we can, again, if we're going from 160 steps per minute to 168 steps per minute, it's about a 5% increase. It's going to pull in her stride a little bit. It's going to shorten her stride just a little bit. So she's not landing as far out in front. Okay, so it's improving the efficiency as we're running, improving her running form. It's not slowing her down every time she strikes the ground. And it's actually reducing a lot of load up into the tibia, the knee, towards the hip. Okay. So that's what we see from overstriding. This is one of the most common things I see with runners, right? If there's one thing that I'm prescribing an increase in cadence for, it's to address overstriding. There's so many people overstriding. I think we need to get away from the foot strike piece. That's something you'll hear from a lot of different people. Hey, I'm a rear foot strike runner. I'm a heel strike runner. I was told to run midfoot. There's a lot of research again years ago when they almost generalized what they saw in the study, saying the majority of these elite marathon runners were midfoot strike runners. So we need to do that. But what we found more recently over the past 5 years is there's no right way to run in terms of how you're striking the ground, whether that's the heel, midfoot, or forefoot. So using your natural strike pattern is good, and focusing on not allowing that foot to land too far out in front of the center of mass is super important from a running form standpoint. Now, if we look at this next one, we're going to look at what's called vertical oscillation. So vertical oscillation, very simply, is that bounciness of running, right? A lot of people you see they're bouncing up and down rather than moving, again, nice and efficient forward, they're going up and down. So we can see here, if I draw a line on the top of this guy's head, right, this is him at his lowest part of his run, the middle of the mid stance phase. Him as he pushes off into that flow phase. Look how high he's going above that red line there, right? He's translating so much vertically. What goes up must come down, right? Body weight, gravity acting on the body. So as he strikes the ground, there's a lot of force coming down that he has to absorb. So from a running form standpoint, this is something that also slows down our horizontal momentum, right? It increases the amount of force at foot strike because we're spending time to come up. We have to come down and load back into the ground, right? There's no other option there. So a lot of force going down. This is someone, he had a past history ACL tear in surgery and was having some patellar tendinopathy, he had a patellar tendon graft and was having some knee pain while running. So what we worked on was increasing his cadence, because if we increase the number of steps per minute, it prevents him from having as much time to go up vertically, where now he's in this kind of lower position to the ground. He can move horizontally, so there's less load into that knee joint specifically where he was having pain. So this is something we want to stay away from, is being too bouncy. We need to translate a little bit vertically. There's no way around it. We're not going to just move horizontally, but we want to limit that excessive motion as you see here in this video. Now, next up, we have crossover sign. So crossover sign, like I said earlier, the feet are literally crossing over like you're running on a line, right? We're not running side by side anymore. The leg is crossing over or landing on the midline, like you're running in tandem. What this usually tells us is there's some kind of underlying stability issue, whether that's at the foot in the medial arch, it could be at the hip or the pelvis. This is Tammy here. This is, again, one of my favorite clients. Who just connected with yesterday. But you can see if we watch her run here, right, from a distance, this was one of her first running analysis videos we did. We did outdoors because it was during COVID and we're unable to get into the facility. But watch what happens to the leg, right? If we look at position, look at the angle through her shirt, right? We can see that drop through the pelvis. We can see that leg coming across, landing directly under the center of the body. This is a pretty classic crossover sign here. You can also see the knee brace on her right leg, right? History of knee osteoarthritis. So what we needed to do to improve her running form, make her more efficient, but also take some stress off the knees, was to build more strength around the hips, build stability at the hips and the foot, and then help teach her how to adopt a slightly wider, what's called the step width, right? We don't want her crossing over because that's creating a lot of load into the knee joint, making her lose stability as she strikes the ground. So we're going to work on a lot of those underlying things, a lot of marching drills. We did tons of marching drills, teach her how to strike the foot, where to strike the foot to land wider as opposed to landing in tandem, and then building more stability around that. So this is another thing, and that you'll see it's fairly common in some people, usually telling us there's some type of underlying stability issue that we need to address. Now, Darlene is a runner that I've been working with since October 2019. Awesome person, super fun to work with. When I met her in 2019, she was just cleared from physical therapy from having some bilateral hip pain, a lot of tightness in the lateral hip region, some back pain. What we found that she was overstriding, right, from that first, we saw in the first person, that young lady, landing too far out in front of the body center of mass, and she wasn't doing a good job absorbing force as she struck the ground, landing very hard and very stiff. Right? So we knew if we increased her cadence, we could help disperse the amount of force when she strikes the ground over more foot strikes. And it wouldn't allow that foot to land as far out in front to really load that force into the lower body. We also found during the evaluation that we really need to work on the hip strength and stability, right? She was a little bit unstable, a little weak in the hips. So we helped develop that as well. Now today, actually, it's funny, I was just texting with her about 15 minutes ago what her plans were for this weekend, but she, again, pain-free now, running like crazy now, right? Still completing her strength training, has a specific dynamic warm-up that works for her, doing some corrective exercise on other days and running like crazy, right? She's training for a 50K in April, doing a lot of speed work, a lot of trail running and things, but cadence was a big, again, factor early on for her to get over that hip pain, hip tightness, to improve her running form, less load, less stress in the body. So now she just consistently has been able to progress her mileage over time. Now, what Darlene said, I just asked her, hey, tell me a little bit about cadence. How has it helped you? She said, increasing my cadence helped to reduce the hard foot strike I had for so many years. It reduced lower back tightness and pain and allowed me to achieve better running times without the risk of overstriding. So she was someone that noticed that getting the legs to turn over more quickly as well allowed her actually to run quicker in the process when she was incorporating some speed work. But it really again, played a huge role in her success early on to get her to a good point where she's now just running like crazy. Now, from a running economy standpoint, we're trying to, this is focusing on the amount of energy required to run, right? So poor running economy means we're requiring a lot of energy at a given speed. As we become more economical or more efficient as we run, our body requires less energy at that speed because we're just improving the overall efficiency of our running mechanics of our entire system, right? So some of the things that improve running economy, stride length, right? This sounds a little bit familiar from what I just talked about a second ago, stride length and vertical displacement. So we know if we land too far in front of the center of mass, if we are too bouncy or too vertical as a runner, we're going to reduce our running economy because these create what's called a braking impulse, right? This slows down the body's horizontal momentum because we're creating too much force as that foot initially strikes the ground. So from an economy standpoint, if we can pull that foot in so the foot lands underneath the knee, if we can reduce the amount of time or the amount of distance we're going up vertically, we can be more economical. Our body will require less energy to run because we're not using as much energy to need to absorb that amount of force at foot strike. Then two other things that are important to understand, ground contact time and tendon stiffness. So what this means is as we increase the number of steps per minute, increase the cadence, right? We're on the ground less time. So it actually creates more stiffness within the muscles and the tendons so we can then use those muscles and tendons to quickly store and release energy. We want our muscles and tendons to be as efficient as possible. We don't always need to tell ourselves to push off, push off, push off, because running is a very plyometric-like sport, right? We can land, absorb force, use that stored energy, turn it into what's called kinetic energy, and create this nice efficient pathway, right? Where we're using our body's motion to store and release energy where we don't have to create it as much on our own. Now, if we think back to pogo sticks, right? We've all used them as kids. Typically, I don't see them as much anymore, which I wish we did, but you'll notice that as you land, that spring compresses, we're absorbing energy. That's that first half of our running cycle. Our foot strikes the ground to when that foot's under the body, we're storing energy, we're absorbing force. And then that second half is when that pogo stick is accelerating to propel the body off the ground. That's when we're releasing the energy in that second part of the running cycle. So we need proper mechanics at both ends here. We want good mechanics as we strike the ground, so we're not landing too far in front, we're not too bouncy. And we also want the stiffness in the muscle, in the tendon, so as we store that energy, we can quickly push off and accelerate the body forward, right? So from a running economy standpoint, we need to think about different aspects of the running cycle. It's good mechanics on the front end, good stiffness, good elasticity, being like the pogo stick, so channeling your inner pogo stick, right? And some of that comes with strength training, it comes with plyometrics, it comes from increasing cadence and getting the legs to turn over more quickly as you incorporate speed work. All of these things play a role in running economy. Now, from an injury standpoint, there's been tons of research on injuries, again, recovering from injury or reducing the likelihood of injury. What we're seeing is what an increase in cadence does. So if I'm running 160 steps per minute, I increase my cadence to 168. you're still running the same speed. That's important to realize is we're still running, we'll say at a 10 pace, right? 10-minute mile pace, but we're taking more steps within that minute or within that mile. So what this is doing, this is dispersing the amount of the force during each foot strike over more ground contacts. So instead of the foot striking the ground 160 times in that minute, it's striking the ground 168. I've still traveled the same distance, but there's actually less force going into that foot as you strike the ground, right? Because more foot strikes over the same distance. So what they found was this was huge for reducing the risk of developing specifically bone stress injuries. I know the risk of bone related injuries are huge, whether it's a bone reaction, a stress fracture, and then other overuse running related injuries, your plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendinopathy, patellar tendinopathy, a lot of these other common running related issues we tend to see. So what we know is as cadence increases, so we increase the number of steps per minute, we can reduce overstriding, reduce the vertical oscillation, and reduce the braking impulse. 3 things we talked about before from a running form and a running economy standpoint. And it creates, again, less time on the ground because our legs are turning over more quickly. So it's less time actually on the ground, which also reduces the amount of vertical reaction forces. So as we land and strike the ground, the amount of force coming down on that leg, because the ground is creating this equal and opposite force back up. So as we strike the ground, that force is being impacted into the body as well. So we can reduce that amount of force, which from an injury standpoint is huge. If we can disperse the force over more foot strikes, less load, less strain, less stress on the tissues, this is huge from either recovering from an injury more quickly or reducing your likelihood of injury moving forward. One awesome quote here that I found in this research study, they said that although several injury risk factors have been suggested, the inability to control the loads applied during initial stance is often identified in the focus of injury prevention programs. So this is saying from an injury reduction standpoint, we want to be able to control the amount of force in that early part of our running as we strike the ground to when we're bending and loading into that leg. That's the most important part we will really want to focus on, better dispersing the amount of loads, landing in a better position, not being too bouncy to have the biggest impact from an injury reduction standpoint. Now, through some of this other research, just you see some general recommendations here. What we usually see in the research is they study a lot of what your preferred cadence is. So when you get on a treadmill and you run your 10-minute mile pace, what cadence do you automatically default to? And then what happens when we increase your cadence by 5%? What happens when we increase your cadence by 10%, right? What types of loads and changes in mechanics are we seeing? So at the foot and ankle specifically, increasing your cadence by 5% can reduce the amount of load in that plantar fascia, that plantar foot area, from anywhere from 3 to 8%, right? So if you're dealing with some kind of plantar fasciitis, which we tend to all deal with from one time or the other, getting the legs to turn over more quickly can reduce the amount of load into the foot. Also, if you're a rear foot or a heel striker, another common injury is Achilles tendinitis or Achilles tendinopathy. We can reduce the amount of stress on the Achilles tendon and the calf specifically, right? So that's another huge area you see a lot of running related injuries. Now at the knee, the research on the knee is just, it almost is too good to be true, right? How we can reduce the amount of stress on the knee joint specifically. If we increase the cadence by 5%, we can reduce the energy being absorbed in the knee by 20%, right? This is huge. So if you have a history of knee injuries, IT band syndrome, patellar tendinopathy, patellofemoral syndrome, history of meniscus injuries or some kind of ligamentous injuries in the past, and now you're running more in distance running, we can take a lot of stress off the knee. And then increasing cadence by 10% can reduce the amount of load in the knee by 34%, right? So those are pretty staggering numbers. If we can reduce that amount of stress on the knee, imagine again how less worn down we will be over time just from increasing cadence, landing in a better position. Now at the hip, you need to increase cadence a little bit more to see some of these improvements that you see at the ankle in the knee, right? A 10% increase and result in less energy absorbed at the hip. And then thinking back to Tammy's situation a little while ago, when we looked at the crossover sign, we can reduce the amount of crossover, right? Because we're not allowing as much time on every single step to allow that leg to cross over the midline. So if we increase our cadence, instead of landing here in tandem, we're going to land a little bit wider, right? So we're we're increasing the step width by increasing our cadence. So a couple important things to think about here, depending on your injury history, depending on your goals as a runner. This is just to see some of the things that you can improve by addressing cadence. Now, this is Mary Lynn. Mary Lynn's awesome. I've been working with her since August 2020, her and her husband, actually. But when I first met her, we were trying to get her past some left piriformis pain, right? Having left posterior hip pain, which as she ran, it was a 6 out of 10. It was pretty annoying to her, right? To the point where didn't feel comfortable increasing distance in any way, was just kind of in the cycle of it wasn't getting better. So what we found with her through a running analysis, and we did this remotely, as you can see here, got her on a treadmill, recorded a side view, recorded a back view. We found that she had a lot of vertical displacement. Again, it was very bouncy as a runner. Her foot was landing too far out in front of the center of mass. And then if you look at her right knee here, we can see, just look at the orientation of that knee. Look at the foot first. The foot's kind of slightly turned out. The knee has this inward angle, right? So we have this valgus collapse of the knee. So this is something we saw on both sides to some degree. So she was losing stability as she was striking the ground and getting into that mid-stance phase of running. So we needed to work on increasing her cadence, not be as bouncy, not land as far in front, because there's a lot of load into the body with that happening, and then work on stability through her strength and rehabilitation program. So a lot of exercise that work on stabilizing, aligning the pelvis, single leg exercises where we're like step ups, step downs, lateral toe taps, things that work on stability and alignment of the lower extremity as well. Now, some tightness occasionally. We're incorporating speed work. She's progressed up to about 8 miles. No walking breaks, nothing like that, running about 20 miles per week. Nothing big planned for the springtime, but doing great and incorporating speed work, a lot of runs. And now just getting and loving the process of thinking about cadence, understanding running form, and then having a specific strength training program that addresses her needs to keep her running as she builds up for some of these bigger races come the fall. Now, this is a quick quote from Mary Lynn. I had never given any thought to the relationship between cadence and my running, but after a few recurring flare-ups of hip and glute pain, I stumbled on the concept in Garrett's webinar as a possible remedy to my frustrating injuries. After working closely with Garrett to find my appropriate cadence, moving from the mid-160s to the low 170s, getting individualized to her, I quickly noticed an overall improvement in my running. The issues that had sidelined me on and off for months subsided within a few weeks. As documented in my running journal, I went from a 5+ on the pain scale to less than 1 by week 6. I also noticed my runs were much smoother with more forward motion and rather than up and down motion, and talking about that vertical oscillation right there. Less impact, not as choppy and more comfortable, and most importantly, reduced pain. It's very interesting for me to see firsthand the connections amongst cadence, efficiency, and pain reduction. Plus, it's more fun. She's one of the people, some people do not love listening to the beep of the metronome, right? After a while, it can be a little bit irritating. I don't mind it in any way. I have my music and my metronome going simultaneously on some of my runs. She likes that, likes to really dial in and focus and be very thoughtful and mindful about her runs. So the cadence has really had a big impact on her hip specifically and running. So now just want to add a little quiz in here, see how well you guys have been paying attention. So what we're going to do here is launch a poll. Take a second, answer some of these questions. I want to see what you're getting from the webinar so far today. 1, cadence is the number of steps you take per minute. Is that true or false? 2, increasing cadence has been shown to improve which of the following areas with your running? Is that overstriding, braking impulse, vertical oscillation, or all of the above? And then last one, adopting a faster cadence above your preferred cadence reduces the amount of load during each foot strike. True or false? So take a second here. See how well you guys are paying attention. See who may be cooking dinner or sleeping, following along right now. I'm gonna give another 15 seconds or so. Let a few more people answer. So jot down something, do the best you can. Not going to be graded on this. No hard feelings if you get something wrong. Let's get a couple more people in here. All right, so let's wrap up here. All right, so cadence is the number of steps you take per minute while running. That is true. 2, increasing cadence has been shown to improve which of the following areas with your running? All of the above: overstriding, vertical oscillation, and braking impulse. And adopting a faster cadence above your preferred cadence reduces the amount of load during each foot strike. That is true. Pretty good job overall for you guys. All right, guys. So now let's get into methods to calculate your cadence. Again, we're talking, it seems consistent that increasing cadence can have a positive effect on your running. We need to understand how to calculate it properly first. And feel free as we go through here, any kind of questions specifically that I can tie into the webinar. If we get to something that's confusing, you don't understand, or anything about your situation, feel free to drop a line in the Q&A. So 3 different ways to calculate your cadence. First, again, most people have Garmin's now, so we can use your Garmin watch specifically, or look into the phone with the Garmin Connect app when everything syncs together at the end. We can do this manually, right? You can actually count the number of steps per minute, and I'll tell you a very simple way to do that in a second. Or we can use an app, which is called the Run Cadence App. It's developed by a physical therapist that works with runners out of Seattle, Washington. Very simple app, I think $4.99 or $9.99 or something, but allows you to check your cadence and then use a metronome feature if you want to retrain your cadence. Now, I'm not going to go through this in depth here. Little boring, a little dry, but if you're someone that's looking to understand, hey, what is my cadence because I don't know, this is how you're going to identify your cadence with the Garmin watch. So there's the watch, in the watch specifically, again, after your run or looking back at your running history, or using the Garmin Connect app, right? We can use the app on our phone. We can go in, we can look at the graphs. We can look at, if we're doing run walks, how fast is my cadence as I run? How fast is my cadence as I walk? And then look at it at different points throughout that. Okay. So this is a way I definitely recommend screenshotting this. If you have a Garmin and you're not sure what your cadence is, a few people here that aren't sure, make sure you screenshot this right now so you can use this as a guide to understand how to figure this out. Now, next up, using the Run Cadence app. Run Cadence app is super simple. And with all of these, I recommend walking first, going through some kind of dynamic warm-up, identifying what your conversational pace is. I think that's important when it comes to cadence. Runner, obviously, if you're incorporating intervals, run-walk intervals, slow conversational running, speed work, we want to make sure that we're identifying cadence first with our conversational pace. This is easier just because the majority of your runs should be done at a conversational speed. So if we identify what our cadence is at a conversational pace, we can then use that throughout more runs to understand how we need to change our cadence. What you would do from there, click the Learn feature, run for 60 seconds on a flat ground, and the app will actually tell you your cadence. And then what you can do after that, if we know, hey, through a running analysis or something, we want to increase our cadence, we can click that Run feature. We can go from 160 to 168 or 170 to 177 or what have you, whatever the recommendation is based on how you're breaking down with your running. Now, the next way is we can do this the old-fashioned way, right? We can do this manually. Very simple. You can start with your warm-up, walk for 5 minutes or so, run for 5 minutes to find your conversational pace. And then all you're going to do from there is count the number of left or right foot strikes over 30 seconds. Okay, so very simple. Once you get that number, multiply it by 4. And then I would definitely recommend do that again. Use the Run Cadence app again, do it manually again. Do that a couple times just to find where your average is, just to see if you're changing anything or the terrain is a little bit off, just to find the most accurate number for you. Now, as we get into tips and drills to manipulate your cadence, now we're trying to work on increasing cadence with the number of steps per minute. A very simple way we can start with is downloading a metronome, right? If we're trying to increase our cadence to a desired number, using a metronome could be so helpful because that's telling us the number of steps per minute. It's giving us an audible beep, or if it's giving us a vibration that we can then strike the ground to immediately on that beep or vibration. A couple different metronome apps. Again, the higher level Garmin's, the watch will actually beep or vibrate if you have that. You can check your features, see if you have access to that. The Run Cadence app, like I mentioned a second ago. And then 2 other ones are the Metro Timer app and Run Tempo app. These bottom 2 are typically what I use on a regular basis and recommend. Metro Timer is completely free. Very simple app to use. So any one of those, if you browse through the App Store, will work for you. What you would do is you would set the metronome to your desired cadence, whatever that is. If you're 160 and we're trying to increase by 5%, we're setting that at 168. And all you would do is coordinate the beep to the foot strike, right? So all you're trying to do, if we watch here, this is my friend and physical therapist in Nashville. We're looking at running on a treadmill, right? Using some cadence retraining here. He's at 165 steps per minute right now. So what he's going to do here, he's going to step off to the side just to show you. He's going to increase the metronome. Hope you can hear that in the background a little bit. 275 steps per minute. You can see the speed of the treadmill never increased. So that's something important to realize is your pace remains constant. A lot of times I see people that as they increase their cadence, they go from 165 in this situation to 175, they automatically run faster. This is not an increase in cadence. This is an increase in speed that brought with it an increase in cadence. So like he showed here on the treadmill, which the treadmill is one of the best places to retrain cadence because you can lock your speed in there at a constant pace, know what your conversational pace is. If it's a 10-minute mile pace, get on there a 10-minute mile, set your cadence to 165. That's what you would normally go to, right? That's comfortable for you, what you normally, your preferred cadence, if you will, and then keep the speed the same, bump it up to 175 so the legs turn over more quickly, but you're actually running the same speed. That's the most important concept to understand when it comes to cadence. Pace remains constant. Now, some tips when it comes to running and retraining with the metronome is you need to start slow and increase over time. With anything else, you introduce a change in running form, it really changes which tissues are absorbing force or being stressed because it's a slightly different position that you're landing in, different stride length, all of these factors adjust in some way. So we want to start slow and increase over time just to make sure we don't sensitize any tissues or we don't want to create any pain in the process. If you're someone who's a big and rear foot striker, you increase cadence too much and you start striking forefoot instead of striking through the heel. Now we're going to start using the plantar fascia, the Achilles, the calf. So we need to make sure we do this slowly over a period of time. I recommend using the metronome, again, very in a limited basis early on. Start to become familiar with the concept and then increase over time. We want to adjust the rhythm to meet your needs, right? So if you're struggling, if you're going from 165, like we saw with Chris a second ago, 165 to 175, you get to about 172 and you feel like I just cannot increase anymore. Work at 170 for a couple weeks or a month. Get comfortable going from 165 to 170. From there, let's go to 172. Then we'll go to 175. We'll build up over time. We don't need to do things so quickly. This is a good long-term strategy. It's nothing we need to achieve right this second. Obviously, it makes a big impact if we can do better with this, but we want to make this more gradual so this becomes second nature, right? We don't want it to be something where we need the metronome forever. We understand we can tap into that metronome almost mentally. We know when, okay, I feel like my legs aren't really turning over quickly. My Achilles is bugging me. My knee's bugging me. Okay, I'm going to increase my cadence. That becomes more second nature and something you can do on your own. As always, when it comes to cadence, you want to recheck your running form periodically. So I never, and as you can see in this webinar, I'm not telling anyone here, your cadence needs to be this number. There's no way I can provide one number to fit every single person. You'll see some places that say 180 steps per minute is that gold standard. This was done off research back in 2005 that found that the average for elite marathon runners was around 180. That was the average. People were above, people were below. So we can't generalize and tell everyone they need to be at one specific number. We need to perform a running analysis, understand what does that running form look like? What is this person's injury history? What are their goals? And then individualize a strategy to fit their needs. And then as always, remember pace remains constant. We don't want to increase cadence and also increase speed. If we're doing this on our conversational runs, keep speed constant, keep your pace constant, get the legs to turn over more quickly. That's where you see the benefit from the cadence manipulation. Now, a couple drills that will help you improve cadence in a controlled environment. It's like I mentioned, not always easy to go out there, just throw a metronome on and to run at a faster cadence and maintain your speed. Sometimes you need specific drills outside of our running to teach that rhythm, the timing, the coordination in that turnover of the legs. So here we're just going to look at simple marching drills. You can hear, hopefully lightly in the background, very subtle beep. This is just an in-place marching, right? Starting very slow, not rushing it, not forcing it. Just teaching myself how to balance, stabilize, strike the ground to the beep. And you can see here what I'm going to do is we're going to increase. Going from 30 to 60, a little faster. I was twice as fast. You'll notice what happens here. So Just to make sure you can hear me, because sometimes it drowns me out when the sound's playing. You can see what happens as cadence increases. So from 30 steps per minute to 60 to 90 to 120, look how my stride or my swing phase of this marching drill changes, right? It's going to shorten things, right? It's going to pull things in. This is what helps reduces that vertical motion, helps reduce that that overstriding. But watch what happens here. So 60 still. Now let's get to 90. Quicker. Knee comes up, comes right back down. Knee's not going as high as before. I'm not holding that position as long. It's a very quick cyclical marching drill. Now we have 120. A little harder to keep up with here, right? Really moving. As soon as that leg comes up, come right back down, but the foot's not coming that high off the ground. Shortening that stride, as you can see through this marching drill. And then what we also can include what's called the pop and float, which is like an in-place skipping drill. A little bit harder, obviously, but you think of once you get to about 120 on the skipping, on the marching, sorry, it becomes harder not to leave the ground and to push off more quickly. So automatically your march will turn into a skip, and this is that progression. Pretty slow for a skip, 90 steps per minute. You have to be really patient on this one. Little better here, a little faster, 120 steps per minute. You can see as soon as that knee comes up, it's driving right back into the ground. 150, quick. How much I shortened the stride there with that. Yeah, quick. As soon as the leg comes up, comes right back down. So these are simple drills that you can implement on a regular basis before your runs, if you're working on cadence within that run, before your strength training, preferably sometimes after. We want to limit fatigue as much as possible, especially if we're doing skipping, just because the kind of the quality of that will decline if we're already fatigued. But these are simple things that work on timing, coordination, rhythm, getting the leg to turn over more quickly. And then as we start to get into some of these skipping variations, we're working on tendon stiffness and elasticity, turning the body into a pogo stick, right? Storing and releasing energy so we can also improve running economy, running performance. Now, this is another one. We can perform marching drills from, again, moving forward from point A to point B. This is Chris again. I'm going to show you at a variety of speeds here to see what this looks like. I have a lot of runners do this on some of their off days just to work on a lot of, I mean, you can work on anything with these. I have some runners from a postural standpoint, a little hunched over at the shoulders. So we're trying to reinforce good posture. Exhale, rib cage down, engage the core, hold all these positions in a solid position to impact running form. Sometimes it's arm swing. I see people that are too abducted, one arm's different than the other, or they're really crossing over a ton. I'm going to add some emphasis on arm swing in here. Foot strike, if you're landing too far in front of the body, cueing that person to strike the foot down directly under the knee so they're not reaching over. Tammy earlier, who we talked about crossing over, right? I'm going to actually put a piece of tape on the floor, and I'm going to tell her your foot lands on either side of that piece of tape. So we're retraining running form by some of these marching drills. You can hear the metronome. This one here is 30 steps per minute. Again, very slow, very boring, but very helpful. What we can do over time here is we start to increase. Let's see, a little faster. I think this right here, 75 steps per minute. We continue to increase, right? Look at his speed. So as he gets more proficient with the marching, he's making sure he's focusing on those key things for running form. So is it where the foot is landing? Is it posture? Is it arm swing, core engagement, preventing the crossover, so running a little bit wider, trying to put those specific things in play that relate to his situation, and just over time increasing the number of steps per minute, because these are the things that will translate over to your running, right? It's a very controlled marching drill. Now let's add in one last quiz here as we start to wrap up, and we're going to get into the raffle. I'm going to enter names into the raffle if you're interested in hopefully winning that one free month in the Healthy Running Program. Now, questions here. So when first calculating your cadence, you should be moving at what speed? Is it walking, conversational pace running? Is it sprinting or all of the above? 2, a metronome is commonly used for running retraining and when manipulating cadence during marching drills. Is that true or false? 3, 180 steps per minute is recommended cadence for every runner. Again, talked about that specifically. Is that true or false? So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to answer this just so we can move on, get into the raffle, get into the Q&A, and start to wrap up. Trying to make sure about 80% of you complete this. So I'm not waiting on everyone, but see how well you've been paying attention. So if you can click there. Let's see how we're doing here. We're gonna get another 10 seconds, let a few more of you input your results. So far, so good. Everyone has them right, which is awesome. So you've been paying attention. Now, let's review these. So when first calculating your cadence, you should be moving at what speed? That's a conversational pace. Easy way to identify your cadence, your preferred cadence first. Sprinting, walking, a little bit more complicated since you're running most of your runs at a conversational pace. 2 is true. A metronome is commonly used for running retraining. And then 180 steps per minute is recommended for every runner. That is false. So great job, everyone. Everyone got those correct. So take home recommendations for here before we get into the raffle. I definitely recommend at the end of this, or in a couple minutes, I'm going to talk about how to schedule a customization call. I offer this after my webinars to make sure everyone's so different. I want to understand your situation, your goals, your running history, any injuries, and then help you outline a strategy that's best for you moving forward rather than thinking, oh, I need to increase my cadence, but I don't know what it is. Let's actually talk about these details to figure out what you need to do moving forward. And then as always, to improve mechanics and economy, you need to complete a slow motion running analysis, right? Again, 75% of runners get injured each and every year, are usually always reacting to things, right? Always injured, going to PT or going through rehab rather than when they're healthy, completing a running analysis, doing a movement assessment, seeing what you need before there are problems so you can address those in the process to potentially stay injury free. Then you need to individualize this to your needs or goals, right? If your goal, again, is to reduce the likelihood of injury, improve running economy, improve running form, you need to know what that looks like to understand what you're trying to improve. And then start slowly, as always. Start slowly when increasing cadence, introducing cadence, because you don't want to sensitize anything in the process. Don't go out and run every single run. If you're at 160 steps per minute right now, don't run every run at 168. Run 1 or 2 per week over the next month. Start to get familiar with it. Start to introduce it. See how your body responds to it first, and then increase it as you go, but don't start too quickly. All right, so I just showed you exactly how to improve your running and reduce the likelihood of injury while focusing on cadence. If you're interested, I invite you to enter your name into the raffle to win 1 free month in the Healthy Running Program. So what this program will do will help you see the absolute best results possible with your running. We're going to do a running analysis, a movement assessment, understand, again, your injury history, your running goals, and your needs, and then really help outline that specific program. This is something I like to throw on at the end of my webinar just to help one lucky person to win that over the next month, just to provide a little bit more guidance. Let's see, I'm going to add one last poll here. All you need to do is tell me yes or no. Are you interested? Do you want to enter the raffle for 1 free month in the Healthy Running Program? Yes or no, pretty simple. So if you are the winner of the raffle, just to know right now, I will be emailing and adding that name to the email tomorrow at 11 a.m. So make sure you check your spam folder. Had someone in my last webinar not get back to me soon enough. I moved on to the next person. So make sure, check your spam folder. If you don't get it, check the email tomorrow at 11 a.m. and then get back to me. Okay, so what we'll do here for the winner, like I mentioned, running analysis, we'll do a movement assessment. Doesn't matter whether it's in person or virtual. Again, my business is kind of pretty fluid amongst all of that, just because we kind of had to do that over the last couple of year and a half too with COVID. But a lot of good tools here to help you moving forward. So now, if by chance you're not the lucky winner of the raffle, but still need help with your running, I want to help you or best serve you in any way that I can. So in the chat box, what I'm going to do, and I actually sent out a text at 9:45, which you may have received a few minutes ago, is a link to schedule what's called a customization call. This is just my way to help you as much as possible and individualize the content in the webinar to your situation. I find a lot of people that jump on these webinars time and time again, continue to jump on the webinars, and I'll hear from them 6 months later, hey, I'm hurt because of this. I'm like, oh man, if we could have focused on this back then, or I'm still trying to improve my running form in this area, What do you recommend? And it's like time goes on. A lot of times it's hard to take action from these general webinars. So this is just a way for me to help individualize the content to your specific needs. So take a second here in the next few minutes, click that link in the text or in the chat box where I just uploaded that, schedule your call. And if you're the webinar, the raffle winner, we'll just use that call as well to kind of get you onboarded in the process as we talk about the running analysis and assessment, all the things that need to take place for that. But if you're not and still want to add value as much as I can. Now, I just want to say thank you guys before we get into the Q&A. Thank you for joining me on the webinar this evening. I hope it provided you value in some way. I will be sending out tomorrow at 11 a.m. I said this multiple times just because this email is notorious for getting into the spam folder. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. you will receive a replay of this webinar. If you want to watch it back on your own time, I will announce the raffle winner in there. I'm going to go through with like a random number generator to pick that specific person that said they were interested in the raffle. There will also be a link for the customization call. If you didn't at that point schedule your call already, hopefully you do it now in the next few minutes, just because I don't have unlimited spots. I do limit the amount of people I can speak to just because I have so many clients that I need to take care of on a regular basis. So schedule that call as soon as you can. But then also, like I mentioned, look in your spam folder since it can sometimes end up in there. So what I'm going to do here is start with, as we start, again, ask some questions. Feel free to fire away, use that Q&A box there. If you have a specific question from the webinar tonight, anything that pertains to your situation, anything you feel like that I left out or that was confusing for you, feel free to ask that question. I'm going to review a couple quick things as the question comes in of the questions that people asked as they signed up for the webinar. So let's see where we want to start. So Bob asked, how increasing cadence does not lead to faster running? So I mentioned that a couple times, and I think the treadmill is the best example of that. We need to, as much as possible, keep pace constant. So if we think about running, two different ways we achieve a faster speed. We push off stronger, or we get the legs to turn over more quickly. So if our legs are turning over more quickly, we're not going to push off as strong. So it's that trade-off in terms of speed, right? We want it almost to be like a net zero. We want legs to turn over more quickly, but we're not pushing off more forcefully. So we're maintaining that same speed. It's almost like a car. If we have a standard or a manual car, if we're going 30 miles an hour, I can drive 30 miles an hour in third gear, right? 2,000 RPMs, kind of just chugging along there nice and easily, or I can shift into second gear, right? 4,000 RPMs at 30 miles an hour. Pistons, engine, everything's turning over a little bit more quickly. That's what we need to think about when it comes to cadence, getting the legs to turn over more quickly, but the car moves at the same speed, right? Now, let's see, Danielle, run a little easier and less painful. So cadence, when it comes to pain, cadence is one of the first things you should try. First and foremost, again, try to run slower. A lot of people are running too fast, but then if we can get the legs to turn over a little bit more quickly, we know through the research, if we can better disperse the force when we're striking the ground, land underneath the knee, not be as bouncy, not create this braking impulse, there's less force into some of these tissues as we strike the ground. So we want to use cadence as a way to mitigate that force during the early part of our stance phase. Most runners that I work with, when they come in with an injury, we're looking at running form, figuring out what small things we can change to improve form, to continue to run, but reduce pain in the process. I see too many people saying this hurts, stopping completely with their running, going through rehab, and then trying to progress to running. What I like to do through the rehab process is let's back down our running in some way if necessary. Let's run intervals. Let's do more walking than running. Let's run less days per week, let things calm down. But we need to make sure we're addressing running form in the process, because if we're running in a way that's predisposing us to that pain and we just stop running, rehab the injury, and then get back to run the same way, we end up going through the same vicious cycle. So it's important to understand your running form, your injury, to really address both those things simultaneously. Let's see here. So Sandy asked or said, have always wondered if my stride is too short. Typically, the problems we run into are strides being too long, right? Overstriding. We want to land with that foot underneath the knee. We don't want to land with it out in front, but we still want to have that nice, strong push off. We want the hip to fully extend as we load the hip, the ankle, the big toe, and we push away. Again, if we shorten on both sides, we're going to have this really short, choppy run, which isn't propelling us. So we want to limit the stride in the front, not overstride or land too far in front, but still be able to push off fully into extension. All right, so a couple questions here. Let's see. So when it comes to injuries, we need to understand that we cannot prevent injuries from occurring altogether. 75% of runners get hurt each and every year. So we need to reduce our likelihood of injury. We need to do some of these things to, again, better disperse the force, land in a better position, incorporate a good strength training program alongside our running to reduce the likelihood of, because we cannot 100% eliminate injuries when it comes to running. The injury rates are just so high, and there's so many factors, right? You can do all the right things in terms of running form, strength training, all your mobility, core exercises, and what have you. But if you progress your mileage too quickly, if you change your terrain and introduce a stressor that your body's not used to, there's just too many factors. So we need to shift our mindset from preventing injury to reducing the likelihood of injury or reducing the severity of injury. All right, guys, so that is the last question here. Let me see make sure I didn't miss anything in the Q&A. That's our last one. All right, so I just want to say thank you for joining me this evening on the webinar. I hope you picked up something. I'm going to get the replay all squared away, look through, again, see who entered their name into the raffle, and then pick that lucky person for tomorrow. Check your email tomorrow at 11 a.m. And for those of you in the Midwest, going to have some cold days coming up, some snowy days, I think starting right now. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Stay warm, stay safe. And once again, thanks for joining me this evening for the Cadence webinar. Thank you, everyone.